Fire Emblem Engage is an enjoyable experience, but its English localization is downright insulting. And no, it's not just because of Anna. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. The Fire Emblem franchise is notorious for being one of the most heavily censored anime games in the West. At its peak, we had the butchery of Fire Emblem Fates, which removed sexy costumes and entire support conversations. It had a whole section of the story altered because localizers were too afraid it resembled gay conversion therapy, proving that, once again, there are people dumb enough not to separate their fact from fiction. Instead of translating what was said in Japanese, the localizers try to change a game's content to make it appeal to what they perceive as their target audience. Oh no, the LGBT may not buy our game if it offends them. It's based off the false assumption that what's okay in Japan is somehow not okay overseas. Here's the catch, however. The concept of a modern, global audience is just a myth, the product of a localizer taking their own views and imposing them on the entire market. They claim to be making changes on behalf of the fans, but in truth, they're only trying to justify changing things they personally don't like. That's the true face of localization. Given that this seems to be the industry standard, tons of fans who appreciate Japan's sensibilities have noticed just how much of their experience is being twisted and shaped by localizers who claim to know better. Despite what they'll tell you, it doesn't take a Japanese certification to realize that, in many cases, the English text on screen is not at all accurate to what Japan got. It's not wrong to want an actual translation of the text, and as much as localizers will try to gaslight you into thinking otherwise, an accurate translation is not some awkward, clunky mess. Nobody's complaining about a translated sentence being polished so that it flows better in English. Rather, we're complaining because of deliberate changes to the content and meaning of those sentences. Luckily, some Japanese creators are aware of this, to the point where they no longer trust traditional localization. They would prefer to use machine translation, only hiring English speakers to proofread and clean up those translations. This isn't to say that Google is better at translating than a trained expert, but rather that many quote-unquote professionals simply refuse to just translate something. Somehow, someway, they get in there and treat an artist's work as a new canvas for their own personal intervention. What's funny is that I hadn't really thought of it before, but it's fair to say that localizers are threatened by the presence of machine translation. Believe it or not, Google and other translation algorithms are getting better and better. Just as AI-generated art is seen as a threat to human artists, localizers fear that their craft is in danger. To that end, I'm sure some localizers feel the need to be even more aggressive with their changes, in an attempt to assert that their personal touch is a necessary part of the process. Fearing obsolescence, they insist translations need a personal touch, and mock the idea that fans prefer more accurate text. For a time, Nintendo seemed to have learned their lesson. With the massive failure of the Wii U, Nintendo became more lenient with the games offered on Switch. Compared to Fire Emblem Fates and Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Fire Emblem Three Houses was a huge improvement when it comes to localization. Sadly, however, with the release of Fire Emblem Engage, it's clear that Nintendo is slipping back into some old habits. The game's English script is riddled with intentional inaccuracies that reflect the values and opinions of the localization staff. Even looking at just 3 of the employees listed in the credits, we can see the types of people Nintendo hires and how they have no remorse for their changes. Rob Hayrit here is very outspoken about his liberal beliefs. Let me be clear, I don't take issue with his right to political activism, but it's frustrating to see that, subtly, Fire Emblem, a fantasy story about defeating an evil dragon, is being used as a billboard for his values. I have no doubt in my mind that he would use the game itself to advocate BLM and trans rights directly if he had the chance. Nick Maragos is someone I brought up years ago when he tried to defend his job by promising fans that games like Senran Kagura would always have their place.
It's the fear that we as gamers are about to lose the things that we love, and that worse yet, they're being taken from us. Taken by collusion or corrupt journalists or feminist critique or social justice warriors, whatever your personal boogeyman may be. It's an awful feeling. But the thing about the boogeyman is that he is not real. What's actually happening is that games are expanding in all directions, and the increased attention on the new horizons sometimes makes it seem like the old ones are being swept away, but they're not. If they were, believe me, I would have more to fear than anyone. After all, I work for a publisher of those traditional games, and so if they got swept off the market, I would be out of a job. But the truth is we're doing just fine. Anita Sarkeesian or Carolyn Petit or Daniel Riendeau have never called for our games to be stopped publishing or have called for them to be taken off the market entirely.
On Twitter, however, he shows his true colors, openly insulting the series and telling localizers not to bring the game overseas, even though the series has games on Nintendo consoles. That means he'll deliberately sabotage his own company if it means he can whine about fan service. Even worse is Rich M. Tower, one of the managers on Engage, who outright admits he doesn't speak Japanese. He has others do the translations for him, and then he just writes whatever he wants on top of that. By all means, his job shouldn't even exist. Yet, it appears this guy who mocks his own customer base gets paid more than the actual people translating. It's not even that he claims to be an SJW feminist gamer that I take issue with. It's the fact that he lets being an SJW feminist transform the games we play before we get a chance to play them authentically. Some of these localizers laugh at the idea that they have the power to do whatever they want without oversight, but when you consider their managers are in on it, it becomes apparent that they really do have that much power. Theoretically, Nintendo of Japan could bark back against these changes, but instead, Nintendo of America sends its localizers to Japan to coach the dev team on their views at the source. Thus, even if those devs wanted to push back, it could cost them future opportunities in the company. For the remainder of this video, I want to actually break down some popular examples where localizers know what the correct translation is, and yet they write something entirely different. The goal here is to demonstrate that they aren't just changing how something is said, but rather what is being said to begin with. There are common themes and patterns that make Nintendo's agenda clear as day. Special thanks to Monblut and Yuntue on Twitter for providing us with the breakdown. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, comment, share, and smash that subscription bell as if it were your waifu. Consider becoming a paid supporter via YouTube memberships, Subscribestar, or Patreon. They all offer the same perks, such as early access and exclusive videos like my lessons in Magecraft. The most infamous change going around online is that Engage's English version makes the player's bond with Anna much more platonic. You see, in Fire Emblem games, your player character is able to rank up their bond with your army recruits. Each time you earn enough bond points, you are treated to a cutscene. While you can get an A rank with every character in the game, you can only choose one of them to reach S rank. Traditionally, S ranking a character's bond means forming a romantic relationship with them. The previous game, Fire Emblem Three Houses, was the first entry in the series to allow for gay romance, and they implemented this by having a handful of the characters be bisexual. As a man, you could romance any of the women, as well as a select few other men. Inversely, a female protagonist could romance all the guys, but only some of the girls. Perhaps Nintendo thought this was unfair to gay players, as it meant some characters could only ever be friends. They addressed this issue in Engage by making it so that only a handful of characters could be romanced regardless of gender. The men and women in the game are all broken down into characters you can romance bisexually, characters that flirt with you, and characters that remain platonic. Basically, in an effort to make the experience gender neutral, they severely limited the romance options for everyone. This is often why I hate the idea of being diverse and inclusive, as most of the time it means giving us fewer choices. Now, while Nintendo said that only certain characters could be romanced, the Japanese dialogue for S-rank bonds has romantic undertones even for the flirty characters. Anna, for example, mentions introducing us to her family as her significant other. Specifically, Anna uses the term taisetsu na hito, or important person. With regard to another living being, it might even be better to say precious person, as the importance is sentimental. This is Anna's response to being too young for romance. Their talk of love is hammered in by the term koibito, which the player character mentions when she says, "It's too soon for us to be lovers, but we can still be partners." As you can see on the left, the official localization doesn't mention Anna's age, being lovers, or significant others. It refers to their partnership, but only as fellow entrepreneurs. Needless to say, what Nintendo gave us is not an actual translation of the text, as the characters are now talking about completely different things. In this case, we can easily see why Nintendo of America made this change. Anna is a child, she says so herself. Dating a minor is a big no-no, and even though the two pledge to wait until Anna's older, certain Western mindsets deem that as nefarious grooming. As a result, when we try to bring up this poor localization, woke-tards miss the point and think we're just salty that we can't date an 11-year-old. The issue is twofold. First, even in Japanese, nobody gets to date a kid. The original text is sensible, with Anna having a crush on the protagonist and them settling to be partners. Our main character is virtuous, the divine dragon who fearlessly protects the weak. It would be wild to assume the character we just spent an entire game playing as would take advantage of Anna's sincere adoration. I understand grooming occurs IRL, and it can be very manipulative, but this just isn't the same situation. Second, there are many other inaccuracies in this game that have nothing to do with Anna being a minor. Fans are equally as pissed about those examples too. Hell, even if this were some seedy grooming plot, I think fans deserve a chance to experience that plot in English without someone at Nintendo deciding it would be offensive. Let me be the master of my own escapism, okay? Plenty of other romances in the game are toned down or omitted entirely. For instance, the player can go to sleep and wake up to one of the characters greeting them in the morning. This is the dialogue for Etie's wake-up scenes. In one of them, Etie says, "Hore naoshimashita wa yo," which roughly translates to, "I've fallen in love with you again." Hore means falling in love, and naosu is to repair or heal, indicating her state of falling in love is rejuvenated. Unfortunately, this was changed to Etie mentioning warm-up laps on their morning jog. Later references to their love are also wiped out. It's part of the player's bond with Etie that you confess to her, and you happily go running together. Also, notice that even when Etie isn't talking about being lovers, not a single one of these lines is truly faithful to the proper translation. They're all changed in superficial ways. Even if some of these lines are fairly unimportant, you can see how Nintendo has writers who take the translations and rewrite them even when they already sound perfectly natural. Localizations do not need separate writers, and even if you must have them around, they need to dial it back, as it's clear all these changes are made to try and justify their job, even though only a tiny bit of the proper translation would benefit from a second pass. Again, the idea here is that Etie is 17 years old, which in certain parts of the US still make her a minor. The stupid part here is that our protagonist isn't necessarily an adult. A big part of the story is being doted on by our mother. We're over 1,000 years old, but that's only because we were put into a deep slumber. What Nintendo's doing here is like removing the romance options between two teenagers, like the kind of stuff you see in Persona games. There's no reason to believe the player character is any older. That, and even if it were immoral, that's not for Nintendo to judge as far as I'm concerned. Also, I'm pretty sure most fans wouldn't mind if they just made Etie 18 instead. The same thing can be said for Fram. She's 16, which anyone in the West should know is Japan's equivalent to an 18-year-old. The idea of late teens being intimate with each other really shouldn't be this alarming. Yet here we have Fram's line, "I always had feelings for you," changed into, "I knew we'd be allies for always." Now, this might just be me, but "we'd be allies for always" grammatically sounds childish, as if the localizers want Fram to be less mature than she actually is. Woke-tards often complain about us infantilizing grown women, so it's strange seeing localizers ignore a young girl's maturity. That's exactly why Japan doesn't freak out over 16 and 17-year-olds. In general, their culture doesn't downplay what young adults are capable of. Actually, this sentiment is perfectly displayed in the character Hortensia. She's 14, and in her Japanese dialogue, she mentions how she used to be immature, but has now changed. She then goes on to say that she fell madly in love with the player. The localization seems hell-bent on keeping her a child despite her actions. It says nothing about her maturing, that is, other than her being naive. So here we have a young girl trying to be honest about her feelings, and Nintendo being like, "Whoa, whoa! Aren't you a little young to have crushes, missy?" Her confession doesn't even imply that the protagonist is going to start dating Hortensia. It's a lot like when people freaked out over Spy X Family. Anya's friend, Becky, gets a crush on her dad after seeing him in a photograph. The show in no way supports Lloyd actually entertaining this girl's crush, yet people on TikTok thought it was so inappropriate. If anyone needs to touch grass, it's those guys. Here's another pathetic example. In Japanese, Tiki is talking to Marth, referring to him as Oni-chan or brother. While it's a bit cringe for the localizers to change that into Mar, the more concerning part is the daisuki at the end. Daisuki refers to liking someone or something, which practically translates to I love you or I love you so much. This isn't even romance, yet Nintendo of America found it fit to scrub out a wholesome bit of affection between two platonic characters. What truly baffles me is that even Citrine, one of the girls actually listed as a romance option, has her Bond scene censored. She mentions the idea of giving you a gentle kiss on the forehead. Kaku ni soto, kisu shite sashiageru. She doesn't even do the kiss, she just teases it, yet America replaced it with, I'll give you my undivided attention. Once again, something sweet and tender is being demonized. Other kind-hearted gestures are scrubbed out as well, including Vale mentioning how warm our hands are. Yes, offering one's hand in the cold is a kind gesture, but failing to mention the hand-holding at all is just plain inaccurate. Seriously, now hand-holding is too lewd for Nintendo. The meme is real. It's as if these characters are completely blind to the concept of romance. In this example, Fogato invites the player to dinner, hoping to ask questions like, what kind of person is your type? In Japanese, half the damn sentence is borrowed English words, tsuki na hito no taipu. In the localization, it's changed to talking about best friends. Not only is that inaccurate, but it also makes the player seem really delicate. Being embarrassed to tell someone your type makes sense, but here, the protag is acting like it's too personal to mention who her friends are. What a wuss! Here we have Panette, who despite being 18, still had references to lovers removed. For this example though, I want to point out something different. At the top, she makes 3 separate references to femininity. She mentions being ladylike, having a maiden's heart, and her dignity as a lady. In the first case, our translator here is actually jumping the gun. To Nintendo's credit, Panette says shitoyaka, which means being graceful. She does, however, say otome kokoro, which helps validate the idea. Notice how the localization refuses to use those terms? A character can be dignified and graceful, but the localization acts like it'd be a sin to even hint that grace and dignity are feminine qualities. I can just imagine the localizer who wrote that seething because they insist a man can also be graceful and dignified. No shit, Sherlock. The misconception these localizers make over and over again is that having a girl who is traditionally feminine doesn't mean that traditional femininity is the only option. I doubt Panette thinks that way as a woman, and it would be stupid to accuse Nintendo's Japanese branch of saying all women need to be graceful. Among all the changes I see in localization, this whole femininity thing is surprisingly common. If you don't believe me, here are some more examples. I never would have thought I'd see the day when a feminist intentionally avoids talking about the male gaze. In this panel, Goldmary talks about how the men watch her do laundry. This is literally the closest I've seen the Japanese language reference the male gaze, dansei no shisen, but because it might possibly imply that doing household chores is a woman's job, Nintendo of America omitted the reference to men altogether. That, or the idea of a woman being looked at by a man might be triggering. It's like Nintendo's catering to that one TikTok chick who claims to be an underage 21-year-old. I really wouldn't be surprised to see those localizers comment on her gym video saying, "Yas, queen, slay!" I honestly struggle to wrap my head around these changes. Here we have Timera, whose actual name in Japanese is Mistira, talking with Fram about fashion. She notes the colors on Fram's outfit are mature, the keyword being otonapo, or adult-like. I imagine Nintendo doesn't want Fram, a 16-year-old, being described as adult-like because it goes against their narrative that teenage girls can't act and look mature. They must be considered children at all times. The other point of note is that Mistira mentions the fact that Fram's skirt is short, or mijikai. I find it funny how it's okay to actually give Fram the short skirt, but mentioning how short it is somehow forbidden, as though Nintendo refuses to acknowledge that the skirt is in fact short. This same attitude is carried on deeper into their conversation, ignoring when Fram says she doesn't want to come off as childish or kodomopoi. Her desire to be treated as an adult is undermined by Nintendo's insistence that she's just a kid. Along with femininity, it's clear that Nintendo of America refuses to properly translate references to beauty, body types, or weight gain. Here, Etienne arrogantly asserts that men these days seek a muscular beauty like herself. Her whole spiel is lifting weights and toning her abs. She's a kinnikushitsu no bijo. She refers to the preferences of tonogata, a term for men or gentlemen. Overall, Etienne is asserting that her body type and brand of femininity are superior to Goldmary's. By comparison, the localization is just pathetic. It avoids the topic of men by discussing the corrupted, the game's enemies, which is dumb since someone's combat potential isn't inherently tied to beauty. It also dodges commenting on Etienne's physique. Again, it's like Nintendo thinks a woman having an opinion is some kind of larger moral statement. How self-conscious do you need to be to get offended when someone else finds themselves attractive? Even if the audience were asked to decide which of these girls is more appealing, it's not like the game itself is rejecting other beauty standards. In dialogue with Fram, we learn that Goldmary is very concerned about her appearance. When she takes off her clothes for a bath, she apologizes for having a beautiful body, or utsukushii taike. Fram even agrees with that statement. As expected, the localization suggests that by having a character be considered pretty, it might trigger women in real life who don't look like her. Seriously, why else would you be so adamant to avoid the concept? This is important because, later on, Goldmary worries that eating too much has caused her to gain weight in places that you can't see at first glance. She's afraid that people will hate her, so she avoids going to the hot springs until she gets back in shape. I guess someone in that localization team thought that by having Goldmary worry about her own weight, it would render bigger women in real life insecure. Tough, deal with it. First off, Japan is a lot more weight conscious. They share a similar biology, so differences in weight are often attributed to lifestyle. It shouldn't be surprising that this mentality comes off in their video games. And as I've been saying this whole time, I want to experience what Japan got, just in English. Furthermore, these are fictional women. If you try to compare yourself to them, you're gonna have a bad time. Artists often draw beautiful women, or women that they find beautiful, precisely so they don't have to impose on real women's choices. In the localization, Goldmary isn't worried about her weight, but rather a silly face she made while eating, because it makes her look less elegant. To me, this makes it hard to even relate to Goldmary, because that's such a stupid thing to freak out over. Weight, on the other hand, is something we're all a little conscious of, even if you look at Goldmary and still think she looks amazing. It reminds me of when anime feminists got upset by how heavy are the dumbbells you lift, an anime about a girl visiting the gym to work off her snack calories. Listen, you can't have health at every size while shaming people for wanting to get in shape. Ironically, the localization actually shares my sentiment. It has Fram saying, "You don't seem any different to me, but I'm glad you're feeling better." The whole point is that Goldmary is losing weight because of the body she wants. Unless she's trying to starve herself, that personal journey should be respected. The last example I want to bring up has to do with the character Louis. In the Japanese version, he's written to be a hime-danshi. If you've ever heard of the term fujoshi, you know that's when you have a woman getting excited to watch men. Well, hime-danshi are the exact opposite. Louis is a man who enjoys watching the relationships between women. He's a yuri aficionado. In that regard, his behavior can be rather creepy, and this is touched upon in both English and Japanese. The difference here is that the localization makes him a watcher of people in general, when in truth he's only interested in women, or perhaps men that are exceptionally feminine like Rosado. Despite Nintendo's effort to keep this game gender neutral, they've actually presented exactly why that sentiment is a load of crap. Sure, a guy who watches people from afar is creepy, but let's be honest, a guy who watches specifically women from afar can be even creepier. The fact that Nintendo felt the need to censor his behavior proves it. This also ties into femininity, as the localizers hide the fact that Louis likes watching Rosado because he's cute. Heaven forbid we like women because they're cute. It's funny, since the Japanese version feels more inclusive, admitting that cuteness isn't tied to gender. That to me is a rather progressive sentiment that Nintendo of America missed out on. With all that said, I want to reiterate a few things. First, it's not okay for these localizers to keep changing the text intentionally. The core fanbase here simply wants Japan's anime translated into English. Even machine translations can show us that localizers aren't giving us that, nor do they intend to. Sure, translating Japanese to English isn't the easiest task in the world, especially when it comes to obscure jokes or references that only make sense in one language. The examples I've shown here, however, are not language-specific. They translate just fine into English, as seen through the fan translations. You really don't have to study Japanese before you start noticing that subtitles don't necessarily match an actor's speech. None of this is a personal attack on the localizers themselves, except for when they intentionally mock and antagonize their own customers. Their clients might be the ones in charge of their translations, but we're the ones that buy the finished product. If we don't buy, the clients don't make money, and they can't afford to hire localizers. Believe me, we don't want to know about these localizers. I couldn't give a rat's ass who they are or what they believe in, but I do care when they let those beliefs get in the way of a proper translation. Now, I'll admit that, despite this atrocious localization, Fire Emblem Engage is doing really well, and I don't even blame people who are buying and enjoying the game. It's a fun experience. The dark side of this is that we'll never get to see how well the game would have done had the localization been more faithful. That said, I imagine the people who bought the game for an exciting tactics experience would be just as happy with a proper localization rather than the heavy-handed one we got. The people who don't care would have bought it either way. At the same time, I'm positive that all the fans who do care about accuracy would be far more likely to buy the game knowing it was handled well. What I can't imagine are fans who go out to buy games like this specifically because they're censored. I've never heard of an anime fan who gets excited for a new release, but intentionally waits to buy it until they are sure it's been censored. Ultimately, I want to remind you guys that if these changes were important enough for Nintendo of America to make them in the first place, it's not petty to be upset about what they did. Someone in localization thought it was important, which in turn justifies why it's important to us. Be sure to go onto social media and let Nintendo know you're not satisfied with this localization. Even if you're like me, one of the people who did buy and enjoy the game, you owe it to yourself to give Nintendo your feedback. If you intentionally boycotted this game, it's just as important that you let Nintendo know exactly why you didn't support them. Only by being active and vocal can we fans make a difference. The time of wishing anime hadn't gone mainstream has passed. Instead, give this video support and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Olympian Doll, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, King Kobo, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Eldon Yarbrough, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Zamas Autonomous, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, President Irina Vladimirovna Putina, Maxwell's Demon, Kengo X77, SF Giants fan Mike, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.